We are going to get started in just a few minutes. My name is Fred Pfister. We're going to let everyone get in who's registered. I know there's a lot of people registered, and I understand Nancy is oh, there she is, right on cue, Nancy. It's like we practiced this, although you are on mute.
Oh, I hit mute, but I didn't unmute. That's funny. Totally planned it. Well, thank you everybody for coming back. Sorry, I got stuck in a little bit of accident traffic out there. It's a little crazy still. But I want to thank you for coming. Day 2 of the exciting part. And I know a lot of you think that first 6 pages is the most important because that's where the grid is and everything. But boy, there's a lot of information in that second half, and that's something you really need to know so that you can explain it to your clients. So kudos to everybody for coming for this second day of fun and exciting marionettes and animals and circuses and flying, right? That's what's going on today. That's so much. But I do thank you for coming. And Fred Pfister, if you have not heard or we're not on the first call, is a longtime amazing resource for North San Diego County. We've worked with him, and he is just a stellar litigator, attorney, and not to go into too much detail because we've done this a couple of times and your information is going to be in the chat, but really there's I work with a lot of different attorneys, and Fred is one of those guys that is like, wow, great, we've got Fred on this one. This is going to be helpful. So I appreciate all of you for coming, and take it away, Fred.
Thank you so much, Nancy. I really appreciate being here and giving this information and giving my perspective on it. As many of you were on the first part 1, we went over the famous grid for the RPA, and so that was exciting. Well, I'll tell you right now, we're not going to go back over that. If you want to look at that, go to nsdcrealtorstv.com and you can see that part 1. But today we are going to be doing part 2, which will take us through the balance of the RPA form. And we're going to go fairly quickly. There is a lot to cover here, and this is a radical change to everything you've ever done with the RPA. So as I said, we'll hit it. You may hear me say, oh, we're gonna skip this section because we already covered it, which means that exactly that we already covered it in part 1. So I'm not going to repeat myself so that we can get through the material. So without further ado, I will just jump right in and where we left off. So for those of you who attended on Tuesday, where we left off was we finished the famous grid. The grid, remember, for the purchase and sale agreement, and I will share my screen so you all can see it. So the famous grid here is this is the grid where all the negotiable terms. So if you're going to negotiate something, it's going to be within this grid. And where we ended on Tuesday, where we ended at essentially the end of the grid, and we were starting to hit what I would call the meat or the detail of the purchase agreement. And that starts with section 4. Section 4 is a great section. Now you'll remember this used to be section 5. Pretty much everything is renumbered in this agreement, in this new agreement. But this section is essentially the section where you list out different types of property, the property type addenda, other addenda, and buyer and seller advisories. This is where you link to other forms. I think this is one of the most powerful things about this agreement, because when you click on these, it should automatically populate within zip forms that form. Right. In the past, you kind of had to know, oh, wait, I need to attach this form, or you might, even if you were able to click and able to link it, it wasn't comprehensive. Here, I think we're being much more comprehensive, and including, several new forms. New forms include, as you see on here, the manufactured home purchase agreement or addendum, the tenancy and common agreement for those of you who are doing TICs, the stock cooperative purchase addendum, if you're doing something like that, a stock cooperative purchase, the buyer's intent to exchange. These are new forms. These are the SXA and the BXA. These are reimagined forms. They've changed the name and reimagined those for your 1031 exchanges. But one of the forms I think is probably most important, and I think the one that you should be your homework for this evening or your homework for the rest of December is this form here. This is the tenant occupied, the TOPA form, tenant occupied property addendum. And there's a very, very helpful sentence here, which I would encourage you to read. Should be checked whether current tenants will remain or not. As you can possibly imagine, in the last 2 years, since this pandemic started, and really even before that, the biggest issues that I'm seeing during transactions is with tenant occupied property. I get calls every week, literally saying the tenant won't leave. The tenant's saying they need 2 more weeks. Oh my God, we're supposed to close tomorrow. And you get situations like that constantly, whether you're on the buy or the sell side. So what this form is this form is for that situation, and it has some default language regarding what happens if indeed the tenant won't leave, or if the tenant isn't out the 5 days before the close of escrow like they're supposed to be. It has language for that, and as it mentions here, whether the tenant will remain or not, you're supposed to use this form. So this is a really handy form. I would encourage you to do your homework. It's not going to be in the scope of today, but it's do your homework, review that form, know and love that form because it's important. And it kind of goes to what I'm talking about here today. You can see multiple perspectives of the RPA, and there's other people who will teach this. One of the things that I focus on in terms of risk management is I'm an attorney. I litigate these, I advise on these disputes. And so I'm looking at this form more from a, how do I avoid disputes? How do I close my transaction? And a form like that is very helpful because I just see a lot of misunderstanding with tenant occupied property and how that works especially in the context of today when some people don't want to get out for various reasons. So know and love that form. There's also another form, Wildfire Disaster Advisory. That's a good form particularly for North County and San Diego. You can also see that there are some pre-marked forms down here. The Buyer Inspection Advisory and wire fraud. Those are the forms you knew about from before. And certainly here are additional forms regarding fair housing, that fair housing form that you all know and love now, and consumer privacy. These are automatically checked, so they're automatically attached to the RPA. So that just know that is now part of this. For those of you who attended on Tuesday, you'll notice I'm going to skip a section here because we talked about in some detail about Section 5 on Tuesday. So I am going to skip Section 5. And again, for those of you who are new, or just as a reminder for those who are here on Tuesday, I'm going line by line through this agreement. It is such a radical change, and there's just from the renumbering of paragraphs that I thought it was most useful to go line by line. That's why I'm going in this linear format. But I am going to skip Section 5, which is the deposit and loan section and the purchase price section, because we did cover that on Tuesday. We also covered the verifications of the down payments and loan applications. I know that was it's something that people were very interested in, particularly if you have a first-time home buyer. It's great that it shows on the document that that having a loan application or having a pre-qualification, there's a checkbox for those items, which is very useful. One item that we did not check, which was or we did not talk about, was 6C. Now, 6C is the old 3K, right? So I'll have references to what it used to be for for those of you who had memorized things, now, old 3K is now 6C. This is generally the same. This is buyer stated financing. But there's a new item here, and this is that it requires the buyer to pursue, if they're it requires them to pursue the original financing that they put on that they stated that they were going to go after, even if they seek alternatives. So they have to make a good faith effort to obtain the financing that they specified. But if they want to seek alternatives, they can do that. It's just making that clear. And it's also saying that the seller has no obligation to cooperate with that alternative financing, but cannot interfere with the closing at the purchase price. So what I've seen in my practice is I've seen people say, they said they were going to get a conventional loan. Now they're getting a hard money loan, or now they're getting some other type of loan. I don't want to cooperate with them. And one of the questions has always been, well, are they still buying the property? Yes. Okay, so, what's, when it comes down to it, what's the difference for you? Oh, it's more work for me. Oh, I don't like it, or this and that. This is basically saying that, if they're going to close, they're going to close, and you can't really interfere with that. You don't necessarily have to cooperate, but you can't interfere, which is a different animal. So moving on, after our buyer stated financing, and oh, by the way, you can see things like it's referencing the paragraphs, paragraph 3B here. So this is all cross-referencing. Constantly throughout this agreement, we're cross-referencing. I know I said that on Tuesday, but I want to emphasize that almost every paragraph cross-references another paragraph. Like here, 7A, paragraph 3E. So we talked about 7A, so I won't go into any detail on that. But let's look at 7B, 7B1, condition of the property on closing. This used to be section 11 of the agreement, and it generally tracks the previous issue or previous RPA. But now it has a couple of changes, and here are the changes that I see. One is this as is. If you notice, as is bolded, right? As is bolded now, and it's capitalized. And as we'll see a little bit later, as is now a defined term in this agreement. It's defined as it's in the definition section. So that we're now getting an actual definition of that term rather than just saying it, which I think we'll look at that when we get to the definition sections, because, oh, by the way, definitions have changed, if you haven't gotten there yet. In addition, the major change I would say to this section is what to do with abandoned property. In the past, there's always been I've seen disputes over they've left this, they've left that, or can I leave this? Can I leave that? And there was always this question of, okay, if you left something, then you got to store it, then you got to call them. There was always this hassle of what to do with abandoned property that was left in a unit, essentially the trash that they didn't want, right? Some of it might be valuable, some of it might not be, some of it might be accidental, some of it maybe they just left it. Well, we have a solution now, right? It now deems items left behind as abandoned. So all items shall be deemed abandoned if they're not removed by the buyer. And the buyer, after delivering to seller written notice to remove the items within 3 days, so they can provide that written notice, may have such items removed or disposed of, and may bring legal action to receive reasonable costs from the seller. So if it's really expensive to remove something that is the seller leaves behind, this now gives the buyer a heads up that they can not, after giving 3 days notice and it's not removed, they can remove it and sue for the legal costs. Whether they'll do that or not, I don't know. But sometimes these things may not be litigated, but it certainly gives the seller incentive that they may be sued for this. So that it gives them incentive to actually comply. So that's a change. Please note that for your buyers and sellers when they're considering leaving something behind, or they find, oh my gosh, there's a whole bunch of furniture in the house. What do I do with this? Tell them to read section 7B1. 7B2 is almost I believe it's word for word from what it used to be. There's no change here, but I do want to highlight one thing is that you'll see it's bigger and bolder, right? So one of the things from going from the 10 pages to 16 pages is they just really increased the font size, and they also bolded things and capitalized things that didn't used to, for emphasis. So this is a good example of, identical language, but now is bigger and easier to read for your clients. So I think that can only be a good thing. Those of you who will say, well, it's a bad thing because now it's 16 pages, but this is an example of same language, just bigger and bolder. Looking at, we're going to keep going line by line. As I said, section 7C is what's up next. We already discussed this seller remaining in possession after close, but I do want to highlight the one thing that I think is anytime you're going to consider, either if you're on the buy side, you're going to say the seller's going to stay, or if you're the seller and on the sale side and the seller says, I want to stay, is this advice, which is number 3. Always tell them to consult with a real estate attorney prior to doing this. I think that you add value to your clients, whether they do or not. A lot of them will say, I don't need that. I don't need to get an attorney. I don't need to consult with an attorney. And that's fine. If they don't want to do that, that's on them. But I think you do a great service to your clients by saying there's a lot of legal rights that you may not be familiar with, client, with regard to renting property, because they may be used to ownership, right? They may not be used to landlord tenant laws in California. And it's a good idea to get a qualified landlord tenant attorney to advise them one way or another on this. And so I just wanted to emphasize that anytime you're considering a rent back on either side, I think you do a good service to your clients by saying, I recommend you consult a landlord tenant attorney in California. And that's what I would, that's your recommendation to them, and they can make the decision then whether that's important enough for them to do it. Because again, I see a ton of disputes over the person won't get out, or they trash this or they trash that, and it's just a misunderstanding of the landlord-tenant relationship. Okay, so let's keep moving here. As we go into D, this is the warranties here. Again, they're talking, the thing I'm going to highlight here, this is very similar to the previous language. And again, they have the language regarding agents cannot and will not determine the assignability of warranties. You'll notice they use the term agents. That's a new term now in this agreement, and we'll get there. They don't use the word broker, they use agents. So when we get to that section, I'll talk to you about how that has changed now. But keep moving on here. We have section 7E, which is, if you'll notice this section, it's talking a little bit more about the, well, let me back up. One of the things you'll see about this agreement is it's updated this agreement to the current practice, what you're seeing in 2022, which is things like, there might be IP that goes with the house. There might be things like, it's not just a garage door opener anymore. It's intranet and internet connected devices. So it's updating this form for what is happening in the sales that you are seeing. And so what they're essentially saying here is that you need to provide all the information, almost like the IP to for the smart home, to get this house to work, and that's on you, seller. It's also saying, which is something new here, is that it's saying that the seller is responsible for securing or providing any such items for association amenities, facilities, and access. Because let's be honest, if you have like condo amenities. A lot of them now are internet based, or they're, they have some type of electronic component to them in order to access them. And so this is, I think, making clear that that has to now be provided by the seller. This is a good point as we're about to jump into contingencies. I'll remind again later on, but I know some people are putting questions in the chat, and I strongly encourage you to do that. We're not going to have time today to get all the chat, but North County is, your association is taking the chat and taking the questions, and we're actually going to be doing a Q&A as a follow-up to this on January 6th. So if you want to go to the calendar for January 6th, the education calendar on the website, you will be able to access that that new education on January 6th. So you can get a lot of the questions answered, and I'll talk about that in a little while. Okay, so where are we? We are on contingencies and removal of contingencies. So this section, we talked about the loans and we talked about the appraisals last time. So again, I'm going to skip over those two, the loan contingency and the appraisal contingency. But let's look at the investigation of property, right? It's a very short section, right? But what I want to highlight here is the structure again. For those of you who remember Tuesday, I talked about how the grid references the detail, and the detail, which is this section, references back to the grid, right? So what we're talking about here is that this agreement is specified or as in 3L3. So that's where you would negotiate this term, and then it references the detail, right? Well, this one happens to reference see paragraph 12 for investigation of property. So let's go to section 12. I think it's an appropriate time to see what section 12 is all about. So section 12, as I get there, apologize for the scroll here. Section 12 is something that should look similar to you. It's similar, but slightly different. They've reorganized this to actually make it readable. In the past, this section was, all the inspections that you could do were like listed all together, and it was like 6-point font, and no one ever read it. Now I think at least they've broken it out a little bit into these sections here, and you'll see in B. But let's start with the buyer investigations, 12A. This is essentially identical, right? Except for this term. This is now a defined term that says otherwise agreed. What does otherwise agreed mean? Well, we'll see in the definition section that essentially means unless you have another writing. If you have another agreement that's in writing, that's what otherwise agreed means. But they're allowed to do the same buyer inspection. So we're one of the things that's the same about this agreement, the RPA with the new agreement, is that the investigations and the disclosures work generally the same. Now there's updated language, but they work generally the same. So when you look at this, buyer investigations, you're allowed to do the same investigations, right? You'll see, here the investigations include, but are not limited to, well, here's another good example of something they may have changed, right? In the past, it said a general physical inspection. Now they've changed it to a general home inspection. Is there a difference there? Maybe. maybe it makes it clearer to people because they think of it as a home inspection, not a general physical inspection. But essentially, in reality, it's the same thing. It's just different terminology. And you'll see that they've, the other things that are in here now, that were here in the past. It's a lead-based paint. That one you remember. Here's the one for termites and pest control. You remember that one. That essentially hasn't changed. And you get all other buyer investigations. Here's kind of your catch-all, right? then you get to review the reports, disclosures, and information. So again, this really hasn't changed all that much, but it is a reorganization of how it's presented. So when I think they took the opportunity to say, hey, if we're going to redesign this form anyway, let's try to make it easier to read. And so I think this is a good example of a section like that really hasn't fundamentally changed, but it is easier to read now. The other items here are 12C, D, and E. These are these sections have essentially haven't changed. These are almost identical to the previous sections, but another example of things that of renumbering, right? So not to make it confusing or anything, but 12C is actually the old 12B, D is C, and E is D. So they literally just moved them down one. But again, renumbering of these paragraphs. But this is essentially the same information that you had previously, except for with the cross-referencing like this, go to paragraph 3L3. So that's good. That's kind of the updates for that section. So let's go back to, now that we looked at section 12, now that we jumped down there, we're going to go back up to where we were, which we had, remember we were on 8C and we jumped to paragraph 12. Well, now we're on 8D, which is the review of the seller documents. Now we looked at that on Tuesday, so I'm not gonna hit that in detail, but if you want to, you can look at that again, it's in paragraph 14A. Okay, so what else needs to be provided? Well, we have title, right? We still have title. You still have to obtain the title policy. This agreement is contingent. Remember, these are all the contingencies. Remember this, the section 8 is the contingencies, right? This is the review of title. The difference here is this reference again to the grid. Remember, that's the grid is where the negotiable time frame is. So if you want to alter the title or you want to alter something, you go to the grid. This has the explanation of what that is. And again, it also has a hard-coded 5 days to review a revised preliminary report if that comes in. If you get some type of revised preliminary report, remember you get the 5 days, and that's hard-coded in here is what I would call that. So not alterable. Next one, I'm going to spend a bit of time on this, even though you might think, well, 8F condos. Why is that? Why is that all that important? But this is another great example of the way this document has been reorganized, right? Previously, this was like a hidden section. It was 10F, right? And it had a hidden box. You could essentially alter this, the time frame, or you can alter this disclosure, and you could and it referenced a CAR form. So if you weren't really looking for this issue, you could easily skip this, right? It was one of those famous hidden places where I've seen more than I can count of purchase agreements where it was a condo where they didn't look at this section because it wasn't highlighted, right? But now this is in the grid, right? So if you go through the whole grid, you're going to see that this condo issue. And so even though it's here now in this 8F, which you might say, well, that's hidden, it's really not, because the negotiable part of it is in the grid. So I think this is a great reference, a great example of why this new RPA is so powerful, because you have less chance of missing something like this, which may be a minor point. It may be the big dispute in your transaction, right? I don't know, but I know that you won't miss it now because it's in the grid. And the way it's set up is it specifies here, you go to 3L6, and that is where you'll have the that is where you'll have the negotiable part of it. And then it also specifies paragraph 11K, right? So this is 8F this is a contingency, and the detail is 11K. So I know that might be a little confusing, but that I think it's a great way of the way this is structured. So let me say it again. You have the grid. Grid is that 3L6, right? 3L6 says this is what I can negotiate. It references 8F. 8F says this is a contingency of the agreement. 8F then references paragraph 11K, which gives you the detail. So hopefully that sequence is, you'll learn that kind of sequence, because that sequence is throughout this agreement of negotiable term, what is it, and then what's the detail. Okay, so if we looked at 11K, what 11K does is then give the detail of what a condominium plan development disclosure is, and it cross-references the grid again as to what the timing of that is. So remember, you can negotiate the term itself, but you can also negotiate the timing, which is the N through N section. So let's look at that, because I think that'll help you see it. So if I go to 11K, you'll see here, what does 11K say? Well, it says in the time period specified in paragraph 3N1, you have to do this thing. And oh, by the way, here are the forms. These are the forms that you would use. And here's the other form that you would use, depending on what your, what HOA documents that are being specified and which forms are required. So I think it's good to see that. And what did they change in this section? You're thinking, well, you're asking Fred, okay, Fred, what did they change? Well, it's a subtle change. It's one of those subtle changes where this is generally the same information that you had previously, but they've removed the private transfer fee from this section. And now that's in the grid, right? So if you had a private transfer fee with your condominium or planned development, that is now it's not hidden here anymore like it used to be. It's now in the grid so that the people can actually see it, and then they can reference the what that fee is, rather than just having it provided to them as some type of disclosure. So I like that. I like all the fees being in one location. I think you will too. I like all the disclosures being in one section. I like all the timeframes being in one section. I think that can only help people. It can only help brokers who are trying to navigate this crazy world of a 16-page agreement. Okay. I know I'm talking fast, but I want to get through as much as we possibly can here. So where are we? We are on 8G. I moved back up to 8G. This is these are leased items. We talked a little bit about this on Tuesday, but what they're making clear in here is that the assumption of leased items is a contingency of this deal. That's not news to you, but now it makes clear that the seller can cancel after a notice to perform if the buyer refuses to assume the seller disclosed items. So the way this would essentially work is seller discloses, hey, there's some leased items. You have to you have to assume these. Buyer says, no, I don't want that. Seller then sends a notice to perform, and it becomes a contingency of the deal. So I would review that if indeed you have those leased items, and I'm thinking of solar. There's possibility for other things, but it's most of the time, 95% of the time, it seems to be the solar that might be leased. So if you have solar, I would review this section. This is 8G. Okay. 8H, a removal of contingencies with offer. Remember, this used to be old section 14C. Now it's been moved to 8H. This is really just a more detailed explanation than what you had previously. Not really a change here, but it's in a better location, right? So in the disclosure location, we have, okay, what is the issue if you remove or you waive contingencies with your offer? So I like that. I like grouping these things together, and that's what they've done here. Section 8I, a removal of contingency or cancellation. Again, this is a more detailed explanation and specifics, and it specifies that the notice perform if you fail to remove. All right, you're going to get, if you fail to remove, you're going to get a notice to perform. So not a lot of change here. I think it's the same process, but updated language, updated section. Next contingency, or I should say the last contingency on here, is J, which is that famous COP form, which is, oh, I gotta sell another property in order to get this property. So this is where that section is, and it has the same cross-referencing that you saw on every other paragraph. Oh, look, 3L8, that's where if you check this, this is where it becomes a contingency of the deal. Okay, so now we're on section 9. 9 is the items included. We already talked about this on our previously, so I'm not going to get into this in detail, but it as to what we included. But this is another reference to say that the MLS, the flyers, the marketing materials are not included in the purchase. That these things, these items aren't necessarily included. So do your homework. They're essentially saying that again. So I'm not going to go over that in detail. 9B, items included in the sale. Again, we discussed this in detail during our, we at least did for 1 and 2. We discussed these two items of what would be items included in sale. So I'm just going to skip right to section 3. This is your security system. Now, this is updated language because now, you might have software now with your security system. This is much more descriptive about what you're getting. Again, they're updating this form for 2022, right? In 2022, you might have all these things. The same thing with 4. You might have these smart home features, a home automation. It's making it clear that these items, these items are going to be included unless you, and it's much more descriptive. This is another example too of where they remove the hidden checkbox. In the past, there used to be a hidden checkbox here where you could say, oh, everything but this, and then you would write in like what you were going to exclude. Well, that was always kind of like one of those gotcha sections, like, oh wait, they might handwrite in something, or they might put in something there that I don't realize what they put in, on this page. Now this should take that away because it should be in the grid, right? If you're going to put it in, you're going to put it in the grid. That's where the negotiable terms go. So this is another great example of get rid of those hidden checkboxes, right? This is an interesting section, the non-dedicated devices. Essentially what they're saying here is that, in order to operate these smart home features, you might need a computer, you might need a tablet, you might need your phone. And those items do not convey. I don't think people would expect them to, but let's be honest, some people might. This is essentially saying that those are not going to be included. I don't like the name non-dedicated devices. That seems, what is a dedicated device versus a non-dedicated device? There may be some dispute over that, but anyway, that's what they've come up with here. 6 is that leased. We already discussed the leased or liened items. 7 is your reps and warranties, and these are similar, but again, they've taken out the hidden exclusion without the blank that they used to have here. the hidden checkbox or the hidden exclusion. They've removed that, so that's very nice. That again, you don't have to search the document to find that, oh, haha, we're not providing a warranty on this, or we're not going to do this other thing for you. Okay, so then we get to 9C. We're on page 7 now. Items excluded from sale. Again, this is more descriptive and details and how that, that the brackets are going to be removed. The brackets are going to be removed and or repaired, but they're not going to paint. So if they take that TV off the wall, if they take, those items that they're actually going to take the brackets with them, but they're not going to paint it. So that's kind of the default here. And it also, that's this bold section here, not painted. So just know that you can take those things off the wall, but you're not going to have that. And again, here, this is another example. I'm beating a dead horse, but this is another example of where they took out the blank that used to be in here, and that's now in the grid. So look to the grid to find your negotiable terms. It's not going to be hidden here in 9C. Okay. 10, allocation of costs. We talked about this, that's in the grid. I love this section that it's in the grid because I think it's easier to see, it's easier to find, but this is where it talks about allocation. So this is your detail. This used to be section 7, now it's section 10. And these are just a description and reference to those costs, and including here, that there are other forms, the RR and the notorious RRRR form, and other forms that may allocate costs in a separate agreement. So it's again referencing those forms. If you're going to use those forms, you can. This is where that reference is. Looking at 10B, I'm not going to hit these points. I think most people understand what the government requirements are. An interesting one here is a reinspection fee. What I like here is it's talking now about who's going to be responsible. So if there's a government inspection or there's some type of lender inspection, that the seller is responsible for the reinspection fee. And who's responsible for those costs. So I think that's a good new section here. Again, section 10B4, it's talking about, that the agent doesn't have expertise in this area. Here's kind of our disclaimer that we have, this claims advice regarding government requirements. This isn't something I'd want you to opine about if you were my client as to, the government or state mandates and whether there's a compliance with it. Unless you have that expertise, by default here, it's saying you don't. And that's not something I'd want you to opine about, because if you're wrong, they're going to be making a claim against you. 10C is your home warranty section. This is, again, I think this is a better description here than what they used to have. And it makes it very clear that the buyer is the one who chooses the coverages. And it also cross-references the grid on payment. So in the past, it essentially said that, that there are coverages out there and there's optional things, but this is making it clear that the buyer is the one who chooses that. Regardless of who pays for it, the buyer is the one choosing it. And then we can look to the grid to see who pays for it. And I really like that because it kind of puts the buyer in control of this issue, regardless of how we split the cost. This used to be 7D10. Now it is 10C. So again, you can see the movement of things left and right. I'll go through this section because this section, section 11, hasn't changed all that much. Some things haven't changed a lot. And one of those things is, okay, what disclosures, what statutory other disclosures are out there? And what I think is more important here, the cancellation rights. So the way this is structured, this section 11, is it talks about the four major statutory areas of disclosure, which are A, B, C, and D. And then it'll talk about the waiver, that is waivers prohibited of these sections. And then it talks about return and termination rights. So Fred, you're saying, Fred, let's just jump into it, right? So A is the section that you're familiar with from before. This talks about the TDS and the NHD, right? Those are items that need to be provided unless there's an exemption, but in general, these need to be provided for in a transaction. So this language should be familiar to you. It talks about the AVID in here. These are the documents that, disclosures are essentially haven't really been altered. Lead, they're just reorganized. Next is lead. Again, we know that lead has to be disclosed. This is a disclosure that's required. They've essentially reorganized it here and cross-references what the time frame for it is. But again, you have to do the lead disclosure. The one that I get calls about all the time, or the two I get calls about all the time, is this one. These relatively new forms on, especially in North County, in the rural areas, the home fire hardening disclosure and the defensible space disclosure. This new FHDS form. This makes it clear that these forms are required if you're in this certain section. And it's referencing those forms. That the scope of those forms isn't part of the discussion today, but just what is look, this is, here's the cross-referencing of what the time frame is. You'll see right there, it's in 3N1, and it's telling you what the form is. And so you go to that form and know that this is a required, if your property qualifies, this is the required form. Oh, and by the way, the next section, they say, look, it's prohibited by law to fail to disclose these items, so that you cannot waive these items. You cannot waive A, B, C, and D, right? So I think that's a nice section to make it clear to the your client that, oh, by the way, we actually have to do these things. Look, it says it right here. And it also says that the buyer has to return copies of these, right? And it says the time frame within when they have to return copies. So they're kind of setting it out. Okay, here are the four that are required. Oh, by the way, waivers prohibited. Oh, by the way, you got to return the signatures. Oh, and so what's next? Well, what happens if you don't, right? What happens if you don't do these things? Well, then you get to termination rights. These are the statutory termination rights. And you'll see that it gives you the time frames here. It's hard coded in. Again, these are the same time frames that you know and love from the previous RPA. So nothing is really new here, but it is reorganized, right? And we're also getting the defensible space now. Compliance has its own. It has its own termination. So it's essentially highlighting that as and again, you could go to that form to determine whether you've complied. If the buyer does not agree to the terms in that, they have an opportunity to cancel. Well, I'm sorry, the seller has an opportunity to cancel. Okay, withholding taxes, I'm going to go through that fairly quickly. Withholding taxes is essentially there's not much new here, but there is more detail. And it says, the time, what you don't have to do, you don't have to withhold if you're doing that, if you're doing a qualified, if you're doing essentially a qualified substitute, if you're doing like a 1031, you don't have to withhold taxes, but but this section is substantially similar. The next sections are almost identical, and I won't spend much time on this because I know we have limited time today, but Megan's Law, the gas and hazardous liquid transmission, the condo, we already just talked about that a little while ago, the natural and environmental hazard section, and those items, so that those essentially haven't changed. The let's see here. It looks like I lost the screen share. So give me just 1 second here and we'll go back. So we were on. Hopefully you can see my screen there. 11M is the material facts, known material facts. So that we all know that. Here's my plug that I also do a class on red flags and the disclosure and the non-disclosure of material facts. If you want to take that course at some point, again, look at the educational calendar. There's normally a couple of those a year for those types of classes, so you can identify red flags and disclose material facts, because that's the #1 disputes we get, the #1 lawsuits. It's way more than anything else. It's always non-disclosure of material facts during a transaction. Okay, so paragraph 12. Again, this was something that we discussed on Tuesday. So I'm going, or actually didn't discuss on Tuesday. We just discussed it a couple minutes ago during this this discussion. So I'm going to skip it because when we were looking at section 8, remember we jumped to 12. So let's get into 13. 13, A through D should look very familiar to you. This is title and vesting. These should look very familiar because these are essentially the same as the previous RPA. Some things haven't changed. So, but again, the cross-referencing is new, but the title investing is similar. E is new though. E is new, and this is making it clear that if your buyer is a legal entity and the property is more than $300,000, and it's made without a bank loan, and it's in what's called a geo-targeting order, in a geographic targeting order, it has the buyer agrees to cooperate with the title company to comply with GTO. What this is that the government has targeted certain counties throughout the country where people who are buying without loans may be engaging in fraudulent material, money laundering for various reasons, and they have targeted those people to with the title company, for the title company to disclose who the owners of these companies are. And guess what? San Diego County is one of those targeted counties. Other counties include, I believe Miami-Dade is one of them. I think in LA County is one of them. I know Clark County in Vegas is. So San Diego County is one of those targeted counties. So that's what this is. So there's not. I guess they included this so that it wouldn't be a surprise to your clients, indeed, if they do that. Some of you probably have already encountered this issue, this E. Okay, so keep going here. F is essentially the same. So this is your manner of taking title and recording the grantee. So I won't spend much time on that. In addition, G here, this is making it clear again of what type of policy of title policy they're going to obtain. Again, not a major change here at all. So we'll skip that so that we have more time for other items. Okay, section 14. Section 14 is a big one because it's the time period periods for removal of contingencies and important cancellation rights. So this is an important section to as it was in the previous form regarding, because removal of contingencies is it's half the battle in getting a close, right? Is you got first thing the hardest thing to do is get the offer accepted, and the second thing is to remove those contingencies so that you can move towards that closing, right? So what it essentially says here is that, and this is section A. This is similar language here to what you would previously see, but again, we have the cross reference. Okay, here's the time frame. again, look at the negotiable time frame. It's in the grid. And then it says, okay, if you want to know what reports you're supposed to receive for the delivery of documents, look at all these sections. And all those sections, except for, actually, we've gone through every one of these sections. So we've already talked about all these delivery of documents, but this is where it specifies that those have to be delivered within this time frame, this 3N1 time frame. Okay, so 14B, this is buyer review of documents and that repair requests, contingency removal, and cancellation. So it's all kind of thrown together in this, okay, what does the buyer have to do, right? And this is organized the way the reason why I like this 14 section now is because it organizes into like, what does the buyer have to do and what can the seller do, right? So this first section is what the buyer review of documents, and the next section is seller right to cancel. So it's organizing by who you are, right? So this initially tells you, this is similar language to what you saw before, but it's really, and it works in the same way, but I think it's more logically set up here. So it's saying, within this time frame, you have to perform your inspections and review the disclosures, right? Okay, within this time frame, again, cross-referencing, you're gonna make repairs, or you're gonna request for a repair request, and oh, by the way, here are the forms. Within the time frames, you're going to deliver that removal of contingencies, right? The CR or CC form or cancellation. So you're gonna either remove those contingencies or you're gonna cancel, right? So it's taking you kind of step by step. Here's your time to review. Here's your time to request for repair. Here's your time to remove that contingency or cancel. And then it makes it clear what a continuation of a contingency is. Again, this is more descriptive language. Hopefully this will, with the more descriptive language, it'll take out the ability to have disputes over this because it'll make it clear to people what they're supposed to do. Okay, so what happens if they don't do that, right? If the buyer doesn't perform, what do we have? Well, we have the seller right to cancel. So you can see how there's seller right to cancel in 14C. Oh, and look, buyer right to cancel in 14D. So again, they've set it up by who you are, right? Okay, I'm the seller, right? Well, my seller right to cancel is essentially the same. This really hasn't changed all that much. I still got to do that notice to perform if they don't comply, and if I want to cancel the transaction because the buyer hasn't complied with what they're supposed to do. In addition, here's a seller right to buyer contract obligation, seller right to cancel this. So this is these are additional grounds to cancel, right? And there's a couple of new ones on here. So most of these are things that you've seen before, but the new ones that I want to highlight here for you are these. So deliver updated contact information for buyer's lender. What's that? Well, now the seller has this right as a default. We saw it on Tuesday. They have a right to contact the lender for the buyer, not to inquire about the finances, but to get a status of where it is. And so if they don't get that contact information, that gives the seller, with a notice to perform, obviously, a possibility of canceling the transaction. So those of you on the buy or the sell side, make note of this. This is a new issue, and I hope you're careful on this. This is a new requirement. Go back and tell your agents in your office about this. Another thing is this cooperation with title on that GTO issue. This is section 8. Cooperate with the title company's efforts to comply with GTO. Again, that may not be an issue for you, but just know that's a new item that if they fail to do that, again, with the notice to perform, that can be grounds for cancellation. They also have this kind of catch-all, which is 11, perform any other additional contractual obligations included in this agreement. That's if you kind of come up with some paint by numbers contractual obligation, that can also be grounds for cancellation. So if you do come up with something like that, look for that. The one other item that I want to highlight here is if you authorize the return of the buyer deposit, except for fees incurred by buyer and other expenses already paid through escrow, paid by escrow. So that's essentially new. If there's some agreement to pay some cost by escrow, but for the escrow to pay it, obviously escrow can't return that money, right? They can't get it back from the third party. So it's making it clear here that you're not going to get that part of your deposit. So for instance, if let's say you put down a $20,000 deposit and for whatever reason there was some agreement to pay some of that for something, just know that that's not going to come back. And I think that's making it pretty clear there. I like this, the seller right to cancel, seller contingency. I think this is a good explanation of the cancellation rights. I think this is one of those things that's added to help your client understand that it has to be a good faith exercise of a seller contingency, including this agreement or otherwise agreed. You see that unless that contingency has been waived, removed or waived already. Obviously, you can't cancel on something if the contingency has been waived. Okay, so where do we go next? Well, the buyer right to cancel. So I'm not going to spend much time on this because if you read it, you'll see that this is essentially the same buyer right to cancel that you had in the previous agreement. Not everything has changed, as we said. So this is really the same, with cross-referencing, but it's essentially the same buyer right to cancel that you had previously. The section E, what I want to highlight here is this is that notice to perform for the buyer or seller side. You'll notice that this is the same language except for one thing. It doesn't have you can't alter it, right? It's 2 days. Remember in the past you could make a change to that. There was like a blank. It was like 2 days or blank, right? Notice what they've done now. Now they've hard coded in 2 days. So it's not paint by numbers on this, which is an interesting thing. And we're going to see that. I'm going to show you that in another couple of items that they've done the same thing where they've hard coded in certain dates. So don't think that you can do the 1 day now because again, it's been hard coded in 2 days for notice to perform. And they make it clear about whether that if it's a Saturday, Sunday, or a legal holiday, that's doesn't matter. Okay, effect of removal of contingencies. This is 14F. This is the removal here is essentially the same, but what it's done here is it's organized by buyer and seller, which I think is helpful. So you see that. How you remove your buyer contingencies, that you're electing to proceed, and removal of seller contingencies. Again, those are essentially the same. Okay, G, demand to close escrow. This is another example of language that is essentially the same. You have to do a demand to close escrow, but look at this, right? 3 days, there's no blank next to that, right? In the past, you could edit this and you could say, well, I want the demand to close to be 1 day, or I want it to be 7 days or something like that. Here, it's 3 days. It cannot be edited. And so that's a hard coding of how many days for your demand to close escrow. So note that, please. I know a lot of you are saying, well, it always was 3 days. Well, it was, unless someone came in and said, okay, we're going to do 1 day, or we're going to do 5 days or something like that. H, effective cancellation of deposits. This is the same as the past. They've just now bolded more. It's easier to read. So they've bolded the language and made it easier to read. But if you have a cancellation of deposits and there's and it's not in good faith, or there's a dispute, there's this disclaimer here: buyer and seller are advised to seek counsel regarding this matter. Again, just like if you're going to rent back, if you're going to have a cancellation and there's a dispute by one side or the other about the cancellation, always refer your client to an attorney. It doesn't have to be someone from White and Bright. It could be some other attorney, but I think you're doing a great service to your client by referring them to counsel. Whether they choose to go or not, that's up to them. But there's lots of rights and responsibilities with regard to deposit disputes, and we get a lot of them. There's just deposits are high. People claim this wasn't in good faith, or they missed the time frame, but no, there was a reason. That happens a lot, and so I think you always should be advising them to seek counsel on something like this. With regard to repairs, this section, repairs and final verification of condition, these two items, they've actually flipped them. So repairs used to be 16 and final verification used to be 15. Just to make it confusing for you, they flipped the two in this new agreement. But repairs are essentially the same, so it's the same process. Final verification of condition is essentially the same, although the date is negotiable in the, or I should say, this is, the time frame is negotiable in paragraph 3J. So you could look at that section, but they've just flipped these. Not to confuse you at all, for those of you who memorized this, but they flipped the two numbering on these things. Proration of property taxes and other items. This is essentially the same language, so I'm not going to go into any detail on that. You know that's normally handled really by escrow, of how they prorate all that. 18, you'll notice that this is the same compensation language, the same scope of duty, but there is one change for those you with a keen eye here. They've added, it used to be called the brokers section. Now it's called the brokers and agents section. So they've really put one of the things, and we'll see when we get to the definitions, they put the agent more in the front. In the past, it used to be, it was hard to even find the agent, right? Because it was always talking about the broker this, the broker that. They've made it much clearer that the agent and the broker are kind of working together on this, and that, from the perspective of the client, whether it's the purchaser or the buyer or the seller, that, they're really working with the agent, right? Sometimes they'll never even meet the broker, but the agent is the one who's in front here. So they've added this language to add brokers and agents to make it clear that who's getting the compensation, who's got the scope of duty. Okay, joint escrow instructions. This section is mostly the same because this goes to escrow and they don't want to upset escrow too much, right? These are essentially the escrows. When you see the purchase agreement, it says and joint escrow instructions, right? Well, this is always the section that is the joint escrow instructions. So most of this hasn't changed, but I'll see if I can highlight a few things in here for you. The first one here is regarding this instruction is essentially the same in terms of what paragraphs apply. The item here that I wanted to highlight, though, is the time frame. Make sure I have this correctly. The time frame to have this is the 3-day time frame. So this is something that isn't editable, but this is the type of information that needs to go to the escrow holder. So won't spend a lot of time on this, but this is what they're going to look at. Here is B, section B. This is the time frame to receive the instructions and to respond. Again, the 3 days here cannot be edited for the payment. This is something that's hard coded in. Section C, same thing. Again, hard coded in of 3 days to deliver the acceptance. Now, acceptance is a defined term. We'll go look at that, what that means when we get to section 25. Know that D, F, and G are essentially the same. This language is similar. E is slightly different because, again, it's saying that it requires invoices for expenses, and it says that there's agreement to provide them within 3 days. So if the escrow holder may require invoices, so if there's some type of invoice that you're paying, they want them 3 days prior to the closing, or within a sufficient time, so that they can add those to their closing statement, essentially. So just know that is a relatively benign, but it's a new section here. Okay, we're moving along. I think we're making good time here. Section 20. This is the selection of service providers. This section really hasn't changed, except for it's changed the numbering. This used to be section 23. Now it's section 20. Again, reordering throughout this contract. 21. This is a bit more descriptive. This is the MLS. This is really this. It's really the same information about the MLS, but it's a bit more descriptive. Again, going with the theme of this contract of we'll tell you the same things, but we'll be more descriptive. 22. The section we all know and love, attorney's fees and costs. That's always my most exciting paragraph. That one has not changed. Yay. 23, the assignment, we addressed this on Tuesday, that the assignment has changed, so I won't cover that again. 24, equal housing opportunity. Again, this is thrown in here. This has not changed. Okay, so what has changed? You're saying, Fred, you keep going through these, skipping these items because they haven't changed. Well, this is a section that has changed. And this is a section I think you should review. If you're going through and you're marking up your sheet and saying, what do I have to actually look at this, Fred? This would be a section I would spend some time with to understand what has changed here. Well, what has changed? Well, okay, so the first one is acceptance. Acceptance is a defined term here, and acceptance is, you'll notice that there is the new part of this is the fully executed part, right? So it's now says, it means the time the offer, final counter offer is fully executed. So what does fully executed mean? Well, that's a term of art that I always use to mean that everyone signed it. Right? That means that we're not missing a signature. You get situations where you need 4 signatures on a document, 3 people sign, and you say, well, is that an acceptance? No, that's not. According to this, it has to be fully executed. So all 4 people need to sign in writing, and delivered to the party, to the offering party, or that party's authorized agent. So in the past, it used to say personally received, right? Well, the personally received has now been removed, and it now says delivered, which is a term of art, right? And it says to the party's authorized agent, which is a term of art. So it's taken away some of that language of, did they personally receive it or did they not? Who looked at this? Now you can deliver to the authorized agent. So I would review this in connection with the other terms that are specified here: authorized agent and delivery. Okay. Agent. This is a new term as well, and you'll notice that this means broker, salesperson, broker, associate, or any other real estate licensee licensed under the brokerage firm and identified in paragraph 2B. So if remember 2B was that agent section. Remember I said on Tuesday, I really like that section because it puts you at the top of the contract. It puts you where you belong, that this is the person who's going to help you through this transaction. Well, now it's defining agent. Remember we saw agent in other places in the contract. Well, agent has this broad term now. It kind of encapsulates all the people who will be touching this transaction from the brokerage. So when you see the word agent, no, it doesn't just mean you. It also means your broker, and it means, you know, a broker associate, another salesperson. It can mean a lot of different people. So make sure that that's pretty clear to you. Agreement. This section is similar here. The D as is, remember I talked about this earlier. This is a new defined term. Well, it's telling you what as is means in the context of this agreement. So it shall mean, you know, that it's the condition. There's a disclosure of material facts and defects, and with the right to inspect, right? So just know that this is now a defined term, and I would encourage you to review this and ask questions about it if you have that. Authorized agent, again, another new term. So this is that person. Remember we said that delivery could be delivery to the authorized agent. It doesn't necessarily mean delivery back to the other side. It could be to the authorized agent. Well, this is what it means. It means that person who was identified in that real estate broker section, right? So that's who the authorized agent now is. CAR form. This is another term of art to mean the most current version of a form that's specified somewhere else. The close of escrow. Now this has been updated. You'll see this has been updated to include not just it's the date a grant deed or other evidence of transfer of title is recorded for any real property, or the date of delivery of the document evidencing the transfer of title. So it's not, you know, because I've seen this question before. Well, is the, you know, they say they closed escrow, but we're not recorded to a different date. This is making it hopefully clear what that actually means, what we mean by close of escrow, because some people get the terms confused. Copy, that's the same. Counting days is new. So this hopefully this will resolve some disputes. I'm cautiously optimistic that we'll get less disputes because what we've now defined how you count days. So this is you know, I don't know whether we'll now have disputes over what the language in this means, or we'll just eliminate all disputes over counting days. But know that this new section here specifies how to count days. I won't go into detail on it for right now, but you can read this section, and if you have questions, that would be perfect for the Q&A that we're doing on January 6th. J, this is what the definition of a day is. You never thought you'd have to define what a day is, but there's slightly updated language here, more explanation. Delivery, I think this is a good one because it's finally updated for the digital world. This requires, you know, the delivery. They're talking about links for documents and receiving that electronic copy. Is that, you know, what constitutes delivery, right? It means a copy of the document or a link to the document. I think that's important because a lot of times you're getting a link, right? Or you're getting a link to documents rather than actually receiving the document itself. That the delivery of that link is a delivery of the document. So I think that's good updated language for the way you're actually doing real estate in 2022. Electronic copy, that's the same. Law, that's the same. Legally authorized signer, that's a new one. That's someone who's, when we get to paragraph 32 and 33, you'll see what that means, but that's someone who's actually allowed to sign for either, something like an entity or someone else. Otherwise agreed, I highlighted that earlier. That's another new section. It means an agreement in writing signed by the parties and delivered to each. So what it's saying here is that you can have an outside agreement to do something that isn't necessarily on one of these forms, or it's in some other form. As long as the parties agree to it in writing and it's delivered and it's signed by both, then that's what we mean by otherwise agreed. So you will see that language as a term of art that's used throughout the agreement. Here's the thing that we're going to do unless otherwise agreed. Well, here's what that means. And the last two are repairs and sign. Those are essentially the same as what you previously have seen. The 26 terms and conditions of offer. Here we are with the terms and conditions. They've added some bold language to this. This is essentially the same, but with the bold language, and also the statement that you're deemed to have read this. If you sign this, we assume you've read this this entire 16-page document. So that should always be a fun one for your clients to say, hey, look, you've read all 16 pages, right? It says it right here that you did that. Time of the essence, 27. That's essentially the same. Nothing has changed. Nothing's changed there. 28, legally authorized signature. I like this section because it really gives a good, helpful definition of an issue that comes up a lot. You'd actually be surprised how often we have disputes over whether someone had authority to sign. And it doesn't necessarily always have to do with families. It could be, was this the right person to sign for this entity? Did they have authority within the documents to sign for that person? So this gives kind of a better description of that. I do a class on financial elder abuse and with the context of real estate agents. And I think this is a big issue within the context of that financial elder abuse. Is son signing for mom? Mom wants to sell her house. Dad's in the nursing home. You're the agent, and and the daughter comes to you and says, Dad wants to sell his house. Oh, by the way, put me, I'll be the signer. Don't worry. And what that means? Does that person actually have do they have the legal right to sign on behalf of Dad? So that's what we're talking about here in this section. And you can see the court order, power of attorney, corporate resolution, that information. Okay, we're going to keep moving. This meeting, by the way, is scheduled to go to 12 o'clock. We added an extra 30 minutes on this because of because of how much we have to cover. But we will finish within that time. So I just wanted to let those of you who, if you have to drop off at 11:30, that's completely fine. But we will go to noon just to make sure we get all the information. And as you can see, we're actually on the start of page 14. So there's only 3 more pages here, 14, 15, and 16 to go. And you'll be happy to know that a lot of this section, what hasn't changed in the agreement? Well, the big things that haven't changed in the agreement are liquidated damages, mediation, arbitration. And oh, by the way, they're all on page 14, right? So liquidated damages, this is the damages you get for a breach by the buyer. This hasn't changed. What you'll notice though is it has this really handy box around it, right? They've emphasized this. So the way that they have reorganized liquidated damages, mediation, arbitration is really to bold them, box them, increase the font so that it's emphasizes these to your clients, so they're not skipped. Because a lot of times I'll see, when I get a case that comes in and they say, do I have, and I'll ask, one of the first questions I'll ask is, did you check the arbitration box? Did you put your initials? And they'll be like, there was an arbitration box. And then I say, well, yeah, it was part of the thing. And they said, I don't remember that. Or I probably did. I checked whatever they told me to check. Right. And what that tells me is that, one, they either missed it, or no one explained to them what, arbitration of disputes actually means, or no one explained to them what liquidated damages means. But now it's, they're trying to bold it, trying to make it clear to people. So, but in essence, this really hasn't changed, right? So you can still, it's the same language. You still have to initial. Mediation still the same. The requirement to mediate by the parties if they want to recover their attorney's fees. That there's no requirement for the agents and brokers to mediate if they don't want to. So that section hasn't changed. Arbitration of disputes. This has the arbitration of disputes. It's essentially the same, only they've added this section here. Remember, I said that they got rid of the hidden boxes and the hidden blanks. Well, they've added one. They broke their rule and they added one, but they added it to a section that requires people to review anyway, because there is this section on initialing it down here, as you can see. But they've added this section to say that you can specify who the arbitrator would be, right? So if you have a specification, or your client wants to put someone in there, it can be specified. But again, remember, this section has to be signed by both sides to be effective. If one side or the other doesn't sign it, or doesn't initial, it's not effective. So if you're going to put something in here for a specific arbitrator, or a specific arbitrator service, then you make sure that both sides have agreed to it by initial. But good news is page 14. You don't have to relearn arbitration, mediation, and liquidated damages. They are essentially the same. Okay, what next? Well, what next is the buyer offer. The buyer offer is section 32. And I previewed this on Tuesday with when I went through my initial PowerPoint, and I said that one of the things I really liked was the way they've done signatures, the way they have reorganized what I would call the closing of who's signed, when does the offer expire. They've really reorganized, added more space, made it less of an afterthought, which it always kind of seemed like to me. Oh, we'll put one line for a signature, and I think of it as, oh, wait a second, what if they're an entity? What if they, what if I want to, what if they're a trustee and I can't put the name of the trust in there, and it was always kind of a hassle. They've now updated that section, so we'll go through this in our time remaining here. So the first section is the expiration of offer. I think it's good that they've made this clear that an offer to an authorized agent is valid, right? So if the offer is signed and a copy of the signed offer is delivered to the buyer or buyer's authorized agent, that is that's the time frame we're looking at, right? And it also makes it clear that seller has no obligation to respond to an offer made. I like that they bolded that, because I don't think that's for you. I think that's for your jilted buyer, right? I know what's going on. It's been going on for years where, every property's got 20 offers, or some properties do at least. They have 20 offers, and you don't always get a response, right? You're the buyer's agent. You don't always get a response. And so I think what this is for your client, so that your client knows that, gosh, we didn't get an offer, or we didn't get a response to our offer. it tells you right here in bold that, there's no obligation. Now it's nice to respond. And I think that's a best practice to at least verbally tell someone, if not in writing, tell them that you're rejecting the offer, or that you're responding. But this is what it's here's the obligation. Entity buyers. This is something I really like, right? Because I deal with a lot of, especially in the context of development, you get, and we're seeing this more and more in residential, not just, things like flips or not just development properties, but even single family residences. You're seeing a lot of entity buyers. And this allows you to check this box, right? And if you check this box and you complete this paragraph, you can identify that entity buyer, right? That they're either a trust, corporation, LLC, or someone holding power of attorney. This agreement is being signed by that legally authorized signer. Remember the term of art, in their representative capacity and not an individual capacity. That's good, because maybe it isn't Fred Pfister buying the property. Maybe it's Fred Pfister as trustee of the blank blank trust, right? Maybe I'm just a trustee. I'm not the actual owner. Or maybe I'm the manager of the company, or I'm the president of this corporation. It's not me buying the property. It's me on behalf of this other entity. So I like that we're finally making that clear here, and also putting in the name of the person, right? And then if the trust, or if it's under probate, they're letting you put in the case number. I really like this. This is a really good section, I think, for those entity transactions that you have, and I'm sure you will encounter this in the entity at some point in your practice. Next thing is what I call the yes, it really is 16 pages section. This is 32C. They put in this statement that yes, it has 16 pages. So if you're missing a page, if it's 14, if your document's 14 pages, that a mistake has been made. The 32D, this is where the person actually signs, right? And again, I really like that this has now been updated. So not only do we have the signature block, but we can print the name of the buyer, and we can print the name of the legally authorized signer, right? So it may be something like Fred Pfister on behalf of White and Bright LLP, or it'd be my signature on the signature block on behalf of White and Bright LLP, which is the buyer, and then I check the printed name of legally authorized signer, and I write Fred Pfister in there. So you could see how that would work especially for an entity, of how something like that would work. And I could even put my title partner over here, right? And I could put the date. So I can actually have a signature block that would work for if White and Bright actually bought the property, and that would work for any of your entities, any of the clients or trustee clients, or if there's a legally authorized power of attorney. This now the signature block makes sense to me. I like it. If it's just husband and wife, or or whatever the transaction might be, you still can do it in this signature block. It doesn't take away from that just because it now has these additional items. Okay, acceptance. Okay, we have the buyer signature. Now what we get to? Now we get to acceptance, right? So this is organized intuitively, right? So remember, this was buyer's offer, and we had all the things in 32 about the buyer's offer. Now we have all the things for the seller, right? Okay, seller, we're going to accept or we're going to reject, right? So if the seller wants to accept, now we have these check boxes. We don't have to remember to do these things. We can check this box, and it should spur. I say should because it depends on zip forms. But zip forms should automatically, if you check this box, it should automatically spawn these forms to do these to do this counteroffer, because that's if you're going to do a counteroffer. If you're not going to do the counteroffer, well, what do you do next? Maybe you want to just accept this. Well, look at this. we have an almost identical paragraph. Remember, we had the 32B was for the entity buyers. Well, look, we have an entity seller. So if White and Bright LLP is now selling that building we just bought, we might be an entity seller. And oh, by the way, here's the same information. And look at this. Here's our, does it really have 16 pages again? So this is mimicking the buyer section. I love it. I love when it mimics the two, because it makes it very clear what your obligations are. And oh, by the way, look at this, section D. That looks very familiar to you, right? That's the same thing that the buyer had. So the same signature blocks that the buyer had that now the seller has. I like that. It makes sense. When we do commercial purchase agreements, this has been identical for 20 years, and now we're finally getting it in the residential context where we're getting this ability by default to have the signature block that we want to use. Okay, we're almost at the end. I promise you, and it looks like we might even end a couple minutes early. We won't go to the full 12 o'clock, which is great. I'll see if I can answer some of the questions in the chat. But again, I do want to plug the January 6th event. January 6th is when we're going to be doing a Q&A on the RPA, because I know these, from Tuesday and from here today, Thursday, I'm sure there's a bunch of questions, and there's probably some detailed questions you have. I'm sure you've been going through this agreement and say, well, how does this work? How does that work? On January 6th, we're going to be doing a Q&A. We'll have some prepared questions, and we'll be able to ask your own questions on the spot. It'll be Stump Fred Day. January 6th, go to the education calendar for North County, for NSDCAR, and in the education calendar, there will be a link to register for that event. We're doing it after the holidays, after you've had a chance to look through these agreements, and come up with your questions. So if you had questions on Tuesday, you have questions today, I would say you could save them for then, or shoot them to put them in the chat, or shoot them to Shirley, and she will compile them so that we have a great event on the 6th. Okay, shameless plug done on that. Where are we? Well, we're at that offer not accepted. This is that if you're not going to accept the offer, no counter offers being made. This is where you would, you put your seller initials in, and I would say always do this. Always, always, always fill this out. I know the DRE audits this type of information, and they do enforce this. That they do enforce the concept that people are not presenting offers to their clients, and so if they do see that, this is your way to comply, right? If you fill out this section, then you know that you complied, right? You don't have to search through your text messages or your memory or some emails. You have it right here, because look what they did. They filled out this section. Okay, last page. I promise we're on the last page of 16 pages. Okay, this is the broker section, right? Last section, last but not least, is the real estate broker section. So this should look very familiar to you, because it is very familiar. This is the real estate broker section that was previously on the form, but there is a new section 4 here, and I think this is more of a section for you. And this is, well, I mean, this is a section for you, but this is more of a reminder, I should say, for you, this number 4, because it makes it clear that it's an NAR policy on the presentations of offers. Remember, I just talked about the presentation. A seller's agent shall confirm in writing that this offer has been presented to seller. And we looked at that checkbox up here, offer not accepted. Well, this makes it clear to you that this is not just good practice. It's actually NAR policy. So please make sure you're doing that with all offers. I know it's difficult when you get 20 offers in on a property to make sure that all are presented and all are initialed. But do it. It's best practice for you. Those of you that are brokers, make this your company-wide policy that this has to be done. We have a lot of disputes over that issue.
Fred,
Yes.
can I ask you a quick question?
Yeah.
That form is for the seller to sign. Are you maybe talking about, if you scroll down a little bit, there's one for the agent to sign?
The presentation of offer.
Yes.
Yes, sorry. You're right. I'm mixing my two. This is what I'm referring to. Sorry. That was for the seller. That was for this, for the offer not accepted. You're right. I'm referring to the wrong thing. Thank you.
Well, because you actually are the one that clarified that earlier. You cannot compel a seller's signature on that upper box, but you can, as an agent, fill out this lower one.
Right. So you're putting it down here. This is where you're making it clear that you presented that offer. So thank you so much, because I did misstate that. So your presentation of offer, this is where you're making it clear that you presented that offer. Thank you so much, Nancy. I misstated that, but that's again, I can't underemphasize how important that is, because we are getting disputes about that, particularly when you sell a property and then they say, well, somebody else offered me $100,000 more. And we're literally seeing those disputes. And if you don't have that filled out, it gets hard to prove whether that offer was presented, and you're looking at text messages and things like that aren't as useful as they might be. Okay, so where are we here? What else is new here? This one is this is new. This designated electronic delivery address. So this section. So you make sure you receive your notifications. If you have a designated electronic delivery address that is somehow different, this is where you can put it so that they know who to contact. This is again updating the practice for 2022. Most people, almost everyone, I think, is communicating electronically now, and so this is your designated electronic delivery address. If you have something where you want to make sure people send something, here it is. And you also see that not only does the buyer's brokerage firm have one, but the seller's brokerage firm has a reciprocal box. And oh, by the way, remember we talked about on Tuesday how it's now buyer's brokerage firm and seller's brokerage firm rather than listing or selling. I like this a lot better because it's very clear who's who. And then, of course, we have the escrow holder acknowledgement. That's not for you. That's for the escrow holder. And as Nancy said, the presentation of offer, that's the very last item. So you've now gone through in almost 3 hours. If you've stayed from the beginning of this on Tuesday to the end here, a little bit more than 3 hours, we went line by line through every single paragraph in this agreement, as comprehensive as I could make it. Again, as I said in the beginning, I think on Tuesday, I said in the beginning, I think you're going to, in about a year from now, think, how did I ever get around without this agreement? How did we ever do business without a grid? I think that's what's going to happen. I know it's daunting now that everything's renumbered. There's a whole bunch of new clauses. There's new defaults. There's new negotiable terms. Everything is, you're going to have to relearn a lot. But once you learn it, I think you're really going to like it, because to me, it's much more intuitive. I think there'll be less disputes over this contract, and it will hopefully lead to smoother transactions for you. So that's the presentation of all of this. I will. Looks like Nancy, you're back. You're at the beach. It looks like you're at the beach there. So
that's North County. That's actually, it should be my my president one. I've actually been here the whole time. It just, you really don't want to see me checking my phone and so on. trying to multitask. There's been a couple of questions in the chat that have been answered. But if there's a couple of minutes here, there are a couple. Nico in particular has one that he really, really, really wants answered.
Okay.
which is the very first one if you look in Q&A.
Okay. I'm looking for his.
Nicholas Johnville, it says, Fred, when we
Yes,
get to
we'll
this
get to
part.
this. We'll get to this part. RPA 14B3 used to allow to change the days for buyers' time to review disclosures after receiving a new seller disclosure before removing the contingency on this specific new disclosure. The regular number of days was 5 days. Is no longer an option to change. As a listing agent, can we counter for 14B3 to be 2 days as opposed to 5 days? That's one of the items. So let's go to that where it's hard coded in. You said it was 14B.
That's a new material facts disclosure.
Yes.
Fred.
It's one of those. So these hard coded dates. I just want to make sure I'm on the right one.
Yeah, it's the one that if
material
after
facts,
something's
okay.
delivered, yeah.
The material facts. You talking about the disclosure of material facts?
Yeah, that's what that one is.
Okay. Specified at 19. Give me just a second to look at how they're referencing it so I can be specific. So I think he's, I hope he's talking about this. Let's see here, because you can change the delivery. Are you talking about when you get 5 days after you get a new document? I think that's the question. If you get a new document, and that's statutory for the delivery of the, I think he's talking about the TDS. Is that what he's talking about?
14.
You're talking about old 14B. Okay. Sorry, I just want to make sure I'm clear before I. Okay, you're talking about old 14B3.
That is the
That's the
statutory one.
continuation of contingency clause. So that
Well, he
would
says
be
a new seller disclosure. So it is the statutory one, Fred. If the days for buyer's time to review disclosures after receiving a new seller disclosure before removing the contingency on this specific new disclosure. So it's 5 days regardless, and that's the statutory. If you get a new disclosure on if you have a 17-day contingency removal and you get a disclosure on day 17, they have 5 days after that.
yeah. So okay. So sorry, I finally found it. He wasn't talking about the old 14B3. He's talking about the new 14B3. So yes, it is 5 days, and I would not alter that to be 2 days. That's hard coded in here, and I think altering that would be against what CAR has required, where you can alter certain things within the grid, but not altering a section like this, which is hard coded. So no, I would not be doing that, Nico, to change that from 5 to 2 days. And remember though, I mean, this is 5 days after delivery of such items. So you should have provided this information earlier, right? So this is essentially, if you're getting something new that's coming in, that's why you're looking at a 5-day time frame on this. I hope that answers your question. Maybe not.
It is it's a little convoluted, but basically if there's a, you get all your seller disclosures and then the day before disclosures are due, they, determine that there was something else that they forgot to disclose and they give that to the buyer. He's asking if you can shorten that time frame to 2 days.
No, that's a 5-day, you get 5 days. And that's why it's so important up front to get all your disclosures in. I tell people before they even list, or when they're listing the property, start thinking about disclosures so that you can get those in immediately. So you're not trickling them in, because if you trickle them in, they get it. They do get it statutorily. They get an extra 5 days.
A lot of people don't realize that includes if you put in your seller CDS that the buyer will complete the AVID or the AVID will be included, and you don't do that AVID, that will trigger the 5 days as well.
Mm-hmm. Right. So do your AVID early,
especially as a broker. Okay, so there's another one in the Q&A section from Barbara regarding cryptocurrency. And I don't know that that's actually a contractual question. I just think it's an interesting question as to whether or not cryptocurrency is going to be included in the agreement. And I know that they wrote it to sort of leave it open for that, but I believe that Gov's earlier conversation on this, and I'm pretty sure you were on that call, Fred, where he said that that's kind of up to escrow as to what they will accept.
Yeah, I haven't seen escrow accept cryptocurrency. There may be one out there that does. I know I've had a client who tried to pay in cryptocurrency and it was not accepted. I guess it would depend on, one, the escrow, and two, the buyer and seller. I assume that they could agree if they found an escrow that would accept it, that they could agree to pay within that context, but I haven't seen it. I just had a client who tried to, and they had to convert. So
I think there's a couple up north, and maybe that's why that became more of an issue. Yeah,
I will probably see it. That'll be the next update, right? It'll be the cryptocurrency addendum.
Exactly.
Coming out in 2022.
Which form of crypto are you using? And what date did you value it on?
Right.
And then Barbara also had another one about solar. For solar, which is owned by the seller, what is the agent's obligation under the agreement to ensure that title and or the warranty transfers before close of escrow? She said it's something she would make sure is addressed, but many agents do not. Suggestions on how to handle this or where you would put it in the contract.
Well, there is a warranty section. I'd have to look through the notes, because I'm still learning where everything is as well. But warranties do transfer, are to be transferred from the buyer to the seller. There is a section on that. I'd have to look though specifically as to where it is. I believe it's on the. I know you're going to hold me to this if I make a mistake on where exactly it is, but it is. It was in. I believe it was in the section we looked at on what conveys with the property, which is section items included in or excluded from sale. This is section 9 of the document. So 7 is section 9B7 is seller represents that all items included in the purchase price unless otherwise agreed. Remember that otherwise agreed, that term of art, which could be you create a warranty. 1, are owned by seller and shall be transferred free and clear of liens and encumbrances, except the items and systems identified in paragraph 9B6, right? So then you go to 9B6, and it's saying that those are leased or liened items and systems, right? So if they're leased or lien, that's different. But if they own it, it should be transferred free and clear of liens and encumbrances. And 2, are transferred without seller warranty regardless of value. So they're not necessarily transferring this with a warranty unless they're transferring the warranty, I think is the way you would read that. It would be something I would ask for a warranty. So if someone's telling you that I have a 10-year warranty on this roof, that I bought this roof solar, I have a 10-year warranty, I would want to see, as the agent, one thing I'd ask for is I'd want to see the warranty documents. Is that warranty assignable? Because the warranty may not be assignable. It should be assignable, and I would expect it to be, but there's all sorts of different warranties out there. And I've had third parties like that take the position, well, it's not assignable, or, or there's details around this, we have to get notice of the assignment or things like that. So just to be on the safe side, I would always ask for all the documents regarding the rooftop solar, but in addition to the warranty, it may be in the purchase agreement itself for that rooftop solar.
Okay, so on the chat, interesting, speaking of warranties, some warranty transfers involve fees to transfer. Providing the warranty alone may not include this information. And is there a spot on the contract, or seller should call company and disclose this, of course, but is there a spot in that transfer requirement that specifically addresses the fee?
The private would be a private transfer fee. Is that what you're?
Well, it says some warranty transfers involve fees to transfer.
Okay, so I would put that in 3Q16. So in 3Q16, there is a blank section. This is the allocation of costs in the grid. And if you go there, that would be a place I would put it. And I mean, you're going to have to know this, right? You're going to have to know that there's a warranty transfer fee, and I would include warranty transfer fee. And if you use more than the space there, it should automatically create the addendum, and you could put in a more specific. For something like that, I would say warranty transfer fee for blank, 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 for my rooftop solar from such and such company, contract dated, September 13th, 2015, or, I would be very specific and clear as to what that fee is. And then I would say who pays for it, right? It's going to be buyer, right? Or seller, and how much that fee is. So
clarity up front always helps with the messes on the backside.
Right. So that's the way I would handle that. Now, of course, if it's going to be if you're going to counter, right? Like the buyer may not know this fee, right? So they're not going to put it necessarily in the contract. If you're countering, that's something I would counter with.
As a seller, yeah.
That issue if you know about that issue ahead of time.
Well, also, if you're a buyer's agent and you notice the solar on the roof and the water softener and the plug in the garage, you would say any transfer fees to be paid by seller. And then the seller can, of course, counter and say what they are. Right.
And I always say if you see solar, if you're walking into a property as a buyer or buyer's agent and you see solar on the roof, it's a red flag. It's not a bad red flag necessarily. It's not like a cracked slab, but it should spur questions for you.
Questions. Yep.
Questions of, okay, who owns it? Is it leased? What are the terms?
Is the company still in business?
Is the company still in business, or they just go under and they're in the newspaper, or
just got arrested?
Yeah, just arrested, or what is going on with the solar? I say, and address that from day one. Don't address it on day 15, because on day 15 it could be too late. It could impact your escrow timeline. It's not something that it's something that you should hit in the beginning. You can see the rooftop solar. It's not hidden. This isn't a concealed fact. So that's where I would address that.
Exactly. There's one question here that's kind of interesting. I'm not sure. What if the buyer wants to bring the contractor to the verification of property? Do we have to allow?
I don't see how you'd prohibit it from this agreement, that a contractor could be prohibited. Thinking about that a bit more, I think
part
that
of their
would be,
investigation.
yeah, I would think that would be an unreasonable refusal on a buyer investigation. Because there is a duty to cooperate with the buyer investigation. The buyer has the ability to do that pursuant to the contract. And I think that would be a
Well, but
reasonable.
that's only the 17-day investigation and investigation of property. She's talking about the final walkthrough, which
Oh, the
is
final
not a
walk-
contingent. Yeah.
Okay, it's not a contingency of the transaction. So I think the access would be fine, but if they identified something, they
New.
couldn't use that as a reason not to complete the deal.
Yeah, but I think the question is, do you have to allow the contractor in? Because that ends up with so much, I don't know, stress at the very end if they come back with a list. Even though it's not, they can't use that to cancel the contract, there's still a lot of angst in that final walkthrough if the contractor identifies something that wasn't done properly or whatever.
I would, my off the cuff is I would allow it. I think that it may not be a part of the, it's not a contingency, but I understand the point. Let me further address that on the January 6th.
Yeah.
I think it would be helpful to look at this in the context of the contract to see whether I want to modify my opinion at all on that. But I don't see that as a something you can necessarily exclude. But let me think about that a bit, Nancy.
Yeah, it's kind of a sticky question. I tend to agree with letting him go in, but I'm not sure, like, if there's some kind of weird thing that gets added if you do, and that's a you question.
Well, I see the practical consideration of if you do that, what's the point of that? Well, the point of that contractor coming in is probably to identify a bunch of flaws in the property that then they are going to say that you didn't tell us about. That's probably what the end result of that is. With my litigator hat on, that's what I would think that's why they would want that person to come in. And so I can see the practical consideration of saying no. I know in the commercial context, we refuse things like that periodically. We refuse, additional after waiver of contingency inspections almost as a matter of course, because we know sometimes the real reason for it is to try to drive down the price or to try to identify something. So I want to think about that a little bit more in the context of a residential. You hope that everyone's on the same page, but we live in a very litigious state and a very litigious, and this is a very litigious area is buying real estate.
Well, the seller does have the right to limit who has access to the property after that 17 days. So I think you're right. It can be a case by case. If the buyer is really picky and the seller's like, okay, I'm done. I'm not going to allow this, but again, I think you have to do a case by case because every deal is different. Every seller is different. Every buyer is different. And, the goal here is to get it closed and to have the least problems. So.
Right.
All right, cool. We're past by 5 minutes.
Oh, okay. Well, then, thank you, everyone.
You've been so generous with your time, Fred. I really, you're awesome.
I would say, let me put up my, I didn't put up my shameless plug earlier, but I'll put up my contact information. So in the event anyone wants to contact me and they have additional questions, they need help with their client, they need help themselves. Here's my email address. Here's my phone number. There's my website. We have 9 attorneys at my office. We deal with real estate every day, defending agents and brokers, dealing with residential commercial transactions. Contact me if I can't help. Hopefully we can find the person that can. So there's my shameless plug, but thank you to North County. It's been great doing this presentation and being a part of this wonderful organization.
And for those of you asking, the January 6th, I don't know that there's a time yet. It will be on the education calendar and you can sign up for that as well. And I love that Stump Fred. That's going to be a good one.
Stump Fred, yes.
We should
Won't be
name it
hard,
that.
right?
We'll just name it that. It's a Stump Fred hour. That'll be good.
Well,
All
thank
right,
you,
good.
everyone.
Thank you.